It's showtime. It's telling me we are live, and this is, of course, Journey of an Aesthete podcast, Book Lunch. This is the first time I think in a while I've done this type of material for a book. It very much connects to our long-running series on Romanticism, because Isaiah Berlin, the ringleader, hero, protagonist of that series, is connected to the four women we will be discussing today, most directly, because of the UK, England, Great Britain, the years between 1920s and 1970s, 80s. And of course, the book I have in mind is this, Metaphysical Animals by Clare Cumhaill and Rachael Wiseman. Clare Cumhaill and Rachael, or Cumhaill and Rachael Wiseman. These pronunciations, I have to. How Four Women Brought Philosophy Back to Life. I didn't know how to proceed with this one. It's a difficult subject because of its scope. Again, we're dealing with the legacy of late 19th century English philosophy into the early 20th century, all the way through the 40s and 50s, up through the 80s. And this is a biography of these four women by two women, themselves esteemed philosophers from today. And the women are Iris Murdoch, Philippa Foot, Elizabeth Anscombe, and Mary Midgley. Now, sometimes the last names change owing to marriage, and that some of that is in the book as well. But I just wanted to say that I didn't know quite how to proceed. So I think the best way to proceed with a book, a nonfiction book about this period, is to mention Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein is sort of the... he wrote two major works, the Tractatus, and then the Philosophic Investigations. And he changed his opinions over time, and he himself had an interesting life. The reason why I mentioned Wittgenstein is that Wittgenstein and Anscombe were very, very close. Elizabeth Anscombe was on Wittgenstein's deathbed. And I feel that his shadow, his spirit, is very much presiding over these four women in various ways. So we'll start with Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein is very unhappy, as many philosophers are wont to be, with what was going on in philosophy. And this is a common theme in the philosophic world. The philosophic field is, a philosopher like Wittgenstein will say, I look at all of my predecessors and I'm not happy with how they see things and how they do things and how they describe who and what we are as human beings. So this book is framed by, oh wow, the philosophic ass, wow. This book is framed by an honorary degree to Harry Truman, and it closes with that in May 1956, and ends with that. And I should say that one of the first things that the authors bring to our attention is the fact that Elizabeth Anscombe condemned and disapproved of this honorary degree to Truman. And so already out the gate in this book, we're encountering an interesting fact. The fact that Elizabeth Anscombe and probably the other the other three women in this world do not like what Truman did. Of course, the bomb in Hiroshima. And so, but it's always important to remember that Harry Truman was not summed by that one act, whatever we may think of it. He's also critical to the war effort against the Nazis. And they feel, again, so Mr. Truman's degree, Elizabeth Anscombe takes a stand. Now, Elizabeth Anscombe is the conservative of the four. Catholic, conservative, relatively conservative, Christian. And yet her stand against Truman puts her in the company, of course, of communists and anarchists, pacifists, vegetarians, assorted, I guess you might call them independent thinkers in Britain at that time. So it's an interesting choice that these authors have that they should not give an honorary degree. The idea should not news of the one-woman campaign. And so very early on, there's Harry Truman is asked about Elizabeth Anscombe's intervention into his visit to Great Britain. And Truman answered, "I made the decision on the facts as they existed at that time, and if I had to do it again, I would do it all over again." Meaning, evidently, the bomb all over again. And so you can give Truman credit for consistency in that regard. So Elizabeth Anscombe said, compared Truman to the greatest villains, Genghis Khan, Hitler, Nero, and Stalin. Will these four be honored in the future? At some point, she even used the word butcher. So, was Miss Anscombe a pacifist in disguise? Was it some sort of Roman Catholic protest? These are, of course, questions that are raised by the authors. So you get a sense that we start the book in the 50s, and just fresh from the victory over the Nazis and the fascists in World War II, that it's common among thinkers like these four women to, as I said, stake out a claim of independence. Yeah, we like Truman, we love FDR. We were, after all, on their side more or less, but we don't want to forget. We don't want to forget what was done to the Japanese, and that there's no excuse for that, and there's no justification for that. And that's a sense of independence. So, and at the end of Mr. Truman's degree, the first chapter in Metaphysical Animals. By the way, the title comes from Donald McKinnon. So Donald McKinnon was a teacher of these four, and briefly was Iris Murdoch's lover. And he uses the term that we are animals, but we are metaphysical animals. And Mary Midgley's book of Beasts and Man, and there's often a naturalistic dimension to these thinkers. Anyway, back to Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein is unhappy with all, and it's very, very difficult. I am not a trained philosopher professionally, although I have read Wittgenstein. I've read all of these authors. I've certainly am familiar with the work, but I'm not trained in it in terms of degree, not professional philosopher. So it's Wittgenstein is part of a larger movement away from the assumptions and certainties of the late 19th century. So the names that Wittgenstein would be rebelling against would be people like Moore, G.E. Moore, or Bradley, giants of 19th century British philosophy. So another word I want to say is about designs of books. So we're in an era now where book publishing is going online and things are on the screen. But look what we have here, the players. We can see our four main characters there. Elizabeth Anscombe, Philippa Foot, Mary Midgley, Iris Murdoch. And look at all the existentialists, the Wittgensteinians. And throughout the book, there's this kind of visual dimension. This is when they were in class, Somerville, just going to go through here and show 1938. So I want to put in a plea for book publishers to publish books like, if you're going to publish a book, do it like this. Fill it with all kinds of doodles and letters and samples of exams. And there's a little, like when Iris Murdoch was going through a communist period, when she was a committed Marxist-Leninist, there's a little cartoon of hers about Marxist interpretation. And it's there's an intimacy to this book. It's written by two women about four women, and there's a kind of feeling when you read a book like this, and again, this is a quality that not all books have. It's very much what I call on the inside. So this book is written from the inside of the subjects. It's not, there's no attempt in this book to sort of reach out towards potential readers who don't know about philosophy, aren't interested in Wittgenstein. It's just presumed. And so there's all this what I call intimate details from the inside about those years. And I think that's of a piece with the design of the book and the layout. So, Wittgenstein writes a Tractatus, which is a complete, all-encompassing system of how, I guess you would say, how the world works, what things are. And so Wittgenstein was a great system builder for a lot of the 20th century. And you get a sense of this. There's a as Elizabeth had been tending to a dying Wittgenstein in her attic, Mary, that's Mary Midgley, was tracing out a more familiar path for a young wife. So she swaps the name Scrutton for Midgley. So of the four women covered in this book, the very first work I read was by Mary Midgley in the 1970s. As a 14-year-old, I saw a book called Beasts and Man. And then I saw another book called Wickedness. And I got these books and I just was reading Mary Midgley, not knowing really what I was reading or the context or even indeed when these books were written. So it would have been this. And so all four of these women, though, are dealing, in large part, I would say, with what we call moral philosophy, ethics. how we ought to communicate, how we ought to live, right? And so I'm going to read from the very first piece by Mary Midgley that I was fortunate to read as a young teen in Tampa, Florida. I'll show you what I was reading back then. And this is a question, again, English thought in general is about, as I said on other episodes, it's interested in clarity, in clearing away misconceptions, or what Ayer called nonsense. Have we in nature, understanding our motives? Every age has its pet contradictions. 30 years ago, we used to accept Marx and Freud together and then wonder, like the chameleon on the tartan, why life was so confusing. Today, there is similar trouble over the question over whether there is or is not something called human nature. On the one hand, there has been an explosion of animal behavior studies, and comparisons between animals and men have become immensely popular. People use evidence from animals to decide whether man is naturally aggressive, naturally territorial, even whether he has an aggressive or territorial instinct. On the other hand, many sociologists and psychologists still hold what may be called the blank paper view, the blank slate view, that man is a creature entirely without instincts. So do existentialist philosophers. If man has no instincts, all comparison with animals must be irrelevant. Both these simple party lines have been somewhat eroded over time, but both are still extremely influential. So you can see from that very first paragraph the kind of philosopher Mary Midgley is. Very titles of her work, Beast and Man. The withdrawal of moral philosophy. There's even a quote of Tom Stoppard here. So she opens up her, the withdrawal of moral philosophy is about how moral philosophy got lost. And the sense of this title of this book, How Four Women Brought Philosophy Back to Life. Part of that bringing back to life is bringing back in ethics, morality into the discussion. And it's she opens up her essay, The Withdrawal of Moral Philosophy, Tom Stoppard's Jumpers. And murder? Murder too, yes. He thinks there's nothing wrong with killing people? Well, put like that, of course it's wrong. But philosophically, he doesn't think it's actually inherently wrong in itself. No. What sort of philosophy is that? Mainstream, I'd call it. Orthodox mainstream. In the circumstances, I was lucky to get the chair of moral philosophy. Only the chair of divinity lies further below the salt. And that's a quote from Jumpers, Tom Stoppard's play. And she talks about G.E. Moore's great Principia Ethica, which came out in 1903. And you could tell from this little bit I've read here, there's a, and this is what may have been interesting to me as a 13-year-old reading, I suspect. Not entirely sure. She spoke to me. I was able to comprehend her. And also the way she brought in natural science. Now, Mary Midgley is one of the devotees of the notion that nature and science must play a part in any philosophy. And so you're very questioning, what is there human nature, and these things are with that in mind. So anyhow, back to this book. There's a kind of inside. So give an example of what of an inside prose. And this is a description of Ayer's Language, Truth, and Logic, which is a major, major work of the early 20th century. They called him Freddie Ayer. That's what his friends called him. Or A.J. Ayer is a more formal name. Ayer's concept of verification is similar in certain respects to Wittgenstein. It's different, but it's also similar. Some people call this the linguistic turn in history of philosophy, making philosophy about language and communication. And above all, verification. Ayer is put it crudely, that verification is the end-all and be-all of philosophy. If something cannot be verified, it is meaningless, or as they like to say, nonsense. So at Oxford, there was a club. It was an all-male club. And they would meet in the 30s, and it met in Isaiah Berlin's room. That's where they met. And they called themselves the Brethren. The Brethren. A.J. Ayer, J.L. Austin, who wrote How to Do Things with Words, another must-read, along with Ayer's work. Isaiah Berlin, Stuart Hampshire, Tony Woosley, Donald McNabb, and, last but not least, Donald McKinnon, who was friend, lover to Iris Murdoch, teacher to these four women. And Murdoch is sort of the one person who doesn't buy this anti-metaphysical turn. After all, he says we're metaphysical animals, not merely animals. He doesn't think it's sufficient. And he even writes an essay called The Possibility of Metaphysics in 1939. Donald was deeply religious, so he's a religious believer. Again, the only one in that group, pretty much. I think maybe Stuart Hampshire. But they were all secular, religious believer. And it was McKinnon that had a great influence on these our protagonists here. So they would meet in Isaiah Berlin's room, and it says here, their meetings were intense, noisy, and relentless. Their debates akin to hunting with a pack of hounds. They were delighted to consign to the dustbin any works that failed to meet their standards of precision and positivistic rigor. Positivism, of course, is a school of philosophy that influenced these men. Positivism, verification. This is a sort of notion that philosophy must be scientific, must do away with nonsense. It's deeply skeptical of the tricks that language can play on us. And that's the spirit of the 30s, and that's the trend. I only go through all of this to say that each in their own way, Mary Midgley, Iris Murdoch, Philippa Foot, and Elizabeth Anscombe, in their way, each of these four women is essentially rebelling against those four male brethren. Rebelling against the anti-metaphysical talk of nonsense and verification. So there is something in history of philosophy of these alternating currents. You have a metaphysical era, and then you have an anti-metaphysical, skeptical era, a non-believing era, and then it goes back and forth, and you have eras that believe in psychology, eras that Iris Murdoch of the four is most known, probably as much known for being a fiction author. Under the Net is a famous book. So she excelled in both philosophy and novels and fiction. And that's highly unusual. I've read Under the Net. And of course, there's a famous movie where Dame Judi Dench plays Iris Murdoch. I don't know if any of you seen that, called Iris. Came out in 2001. Jim Broadbent plays her husband, plays John Bailey. It's a pretty decent biopic of her. And I'm just trying to find examples of the kind of spirit. Here we go. Elizabeth Anscombe meets Ludwig Wittgenstein. This is the big moment, right? When Elizabeth met Wittgenstein, she was 25. He was 55 and had only 7 years to live. The chaos and disorder that he caused in the lives of those around him, combined with Elizabeth's isolation and poverty, would have made an outsider observer fear for her. But she was ready for Wittgenstein and he for her. She had two things that he needed in an interlocutor and philosophical friend. First, she was deeply perplexed. You might wonder, Elizabeth Anscombe's a Christian, she's a Catholic, what she had to be perplexed about? You might be asking yourself, but we should remind ourselves, no matter what you believe, all of us, believer, non-believer, wise, stupid, goes through periods where we are perplexed. That's normal. It's a normal. Being perplexed is a state of mind as natural as hunger or as love or anything else. But she was perplexed. So she was perplexed. And Wittgenstein was disgusted with teaching. He grew to hate teaching. And he was angry at those he taught. His sense that those studying philosophy at Cambridge University were not genuinely puzzled. So Wittgenstein, my students aren't puzzled, but Elizabeth Anscombe, she's deeply puzzled. So I think it's fair to say Ludwig Wittgenstein loved Elizabeth Anscombe precisely because she was puzzled. And this is another theme in this book, problems and mysteries. One of the things that Donald McKinnon taught these four women is he admonished them to never let a mystery become a problem. Mysteries are always more truthful than problems. And if you have a problem, I think one, you might say, solution is to turn the problem into a mystery. And that's something to think about there. That's like that. Any event, perplexed. Elizabeth was perplexed. You know, she spent her teens worrying about over divine foreknowledge and a faulty proof that every event must have a cause. She had aroused censure over the conditions for a just war. Again, attacking Truman in a time when you don't attack Truman. If it's 1952 and Truman is getting an honorary degree, you don't show up and say, you know, Truman, you suck. You've murdered these Japanese. You don't do that. Rebellious in that sense. She had a religious faith that made her serious. For Elizabeth, the problem of the identity of bodies was neither a technical nor a scientific puzzle. It was a matter of her immortal soul. And so, there's a sample here of Wittgenstein and one of his students. And this is the part of Wittgenstein that really, really, really perplexed so many people of the era. And he could be a cruel and exacting and tough, known for toughness. And here's a sample of that. Wittgenstein. Suppose that for some people counting were learnt first as a sort of poetry, and then later used as a way of measuring fields. You see someone pacing in a field. What makes you say he is measuring and not doing poetry? Student. You find out if he is counting? Wittgenstein. You don't know his language. Student 2. You see if his pace is a constant unit? Wittgenstein. That might be a dance. You study their lives, Miller says. Yes, you need the context for a lot of other things they do. Take any such phenomenon as comparing colors, measuring time, comparing lengths, playing games. They are specific. I'll show you things we humans do. And so one of Wittgenstein's contributions to philosophy is the idea that context, while maybe not everything, is so damned important. Context, history, one's experience, and then how that translates into language. And so this kind of precise measurement, this sort of very careful, precise measurement of things is the nature of this kind of philosophy. I should mention that Philippa Foot, her contribution is one of the most famous thought experiments in the history of philosophy. She invented the trolley problem in 1967 in an essay on abortion, defense of abortion rights actually, and the double effect. And so the experiment imagines if you have a trolley, I'm sure you've heard this before, and you can prevent the trolley running into 5 people. Do you redirect it? These are your only choices. Do you redirect the trolley to kill just 1 person? Is that permitted to save the 5? And these are kind of the thought experiment in philosophy is something philosophers invent. They invent fictional or hypotheticals. So you could say, well, what one ought to do. And Philippa Foot invented the most famous one. That essay, of course, the work Moral Goodness. Another example of this kind of biography. Each morning, Mary descended from her bedsitter on the top floor of 55 Parktown and mounted her bicycle. She pedaled past Iris's second-year lodgings, number 43, memories of tinned sardines and grainy newspaper photographs of troops lined up on the beaches at Dunkirk drifting through her mind. Mary had to keep her wits about her as she joined the swarm of cyclists clattering through the streets and along the pavements of Oxford. As undergraduates, she and Iris had found themselves aging while the men grew younger, an illusion created by conscription. Now the illusion reversed direction. The undergraduates stepping off the trains, army-issue boots, swapped for lace-up Oxfords, were mature adults. Many, like Michael Foot, had left Oxford as young boys just out of school. There was something a little absurd about these bearded undergraduates, many of them husbands and fathers crammed into packed lecture halls, alongside those for whom the university was, as it had been for them a lifetime ago, their first taste of freedom after school. The older undergraduates were exotic. They had a proper, it's in quotes, quote unquote, proper war. In 1945, the British people voted out Winston Churchill and voted in Clement Attlee, Labour Party. And that's a period that was, after 45, were British, of a lot of invention, a lot of excitement and optimism. In 1945, the extinction of metaphysics had been declared but not yet chronicled. The publications proclaiming its defeat still to be written. And written they were, of course. I mentioned Paul Grease, H.L.A. Hard, who's a legal scholar, Stuart Hampshire. Over the coming 2 decades, the story of an Austrian movement embedded in a Cambridge tradition by refugee scholars and women logicians, whose target was propaganda and confusion, would become that of an Oxford revolution against metaphysics, masterminded by Gilbert Ryle, ignited by Ayer, coordinated by Austin, and carried brightly into the future by their intellectual sons and by their sons' sons. So it's made clear that this is a male, I guess presumably male point of view, this temperament. Philippa determines to show that Ayer is wrong. So here's a good example of Philippa. I mentioned Philippa Foot. As an old woman, almost 90, Philippa Foot would recall, it was significant that news of the concentration camps hit us just when I came back to Oxford in 1945. This news was shattering in a fashion that no one now can easily understand. we had thought that something like this could not happen. That's a common sentiment in those years. The idea that the impossible had happened, the worst case, the worst situation. It's something that people often say at the time, either then or reflecting back. And Elizabeth Anscombe says in her dissertation, what is the form of life, the shape of the soul of a human being? Those are good questions. Those are good questions. And again, it's a question that doesn't admit of a solution to a problem type of thing, but I would say an eternal mystery. So Iris Murdoch is lecturing on Jean-Paul Sartre, who she met in France, no less, or actually in Soho. But she basically Iris Murdoch is introducing existentialism and Sartre to the English. So looking through this book now, after having read it, and looking through all of these accounts, and this is interesting here. Looking through all these accounts, it makes me feel, I guess I would say, a profound sense of gratitude that this was chronicled and put down in this book by Cumhaill and Wiseman, so that I can look at this book and I can think about all those years and think about where we've come from. It's quite something. It's quite something. Anyhow, there's one of the notes by Rains and Books. Can you see there? It says bachelor. So this is Mary Midgley has Rains and Books. Practically all the great European philosophers, she has typewritten here, have been bachelors. Should you doubt that, here are some figures. Unmarried: Plato, Plotinus, Bacon, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Hobbes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, and Kant. Unmarried, or married, actually, no, married, I think it says here, Socrates, Aristotle, and Hegel. I do not cram the groaning scale with books with monks and friars, because there was always a chance they had some other philosophy for joining their orders. What to make of this, she asks. Well, philosophers do need to concentrate. They are not like poets. Nearly all good poets marry, however, badly. And she has crossed out here, madly. Isn't that clever? So all poets usually marry, however, badly. But what they most need is space. But it says here, and this is our two authors remind us, life without dependence, even lived in isolation, need not be unreal and disconnected, she thought. Not if it is lived with love. And it said Iris Murdoch's lifelong philosophical and literary love affair with love began in earnest in 1951, when she agreed to give a series of radio talks on the work of the French philosopher Simone Weil. Simone Weil is a famous Jewish mystic, Christian Jewish mystic, an activist against Nazism. Again, Iris Murdoch lectured on Sartre, she lectured on Simone Weil. The radio, I want you to think about what it could possibly mean to have a public intellectual like Iris Murdoch talking about Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone Weil on the radio with the BBC. I'm just saying that was a thing. I'm just saying. And I think that we're better for it, I should say. Yes, Iris Murdoch. It says here, as a youthful communist during the war, lectures by Dodds left Iris cold. Dodds was an advisor. She had read Plato's Republic in 1940 while busy with the Oxford Reds, preparing for another Bolshevik revolution, and had been so disgusted by the old reactionary that, as she joked to her friend, she took to selling the Daily Worker, which was the CP newspaper at the time. Of course, Iris Murdoch did not remain a communist. Here are some doodles. Now look at an example. Again. See? So I would just plead with all you book publishers. This is how you should design and publish a book like this. It takes you into the world of these four women most intimately. There's a passage in here where Wittgenstein writes, "What we are supplying are really remarks on the natural history of human beings." And our two authors here, Wiseman and Cumhaill, step out and do some writing of their own and from their own point of view. And they write, "A natural history of human beings will include facts about human nature of the kind that would be found in a natural history of cats. The cactus needs warm weather to survive. A kitten is born with closed eyes. The human adult has 32 teeth. But we humans are metaphysical animals. We dwell in the past as well as the present. You should be ashamed. We are very proud of you. What you did was brave. You must say sorry. Humiliating, courageous, disrespectful, orient us towards the world and each other. We make promises and imagine our future. It is part of our nature to question. By asking why, the child's question, it says, asking why, the child begins to draw connections, to trace the larger patterns that transcend the region of space and time in which he is situated, to relate cause and effect, purpose and goal. We can come to see the same event here and now as falling under different descriptions. He can view it against a wider background. A square of paper grows into a box in London. I am sending a letter, putting this letter in a box. A coat is folded. I am contributing to an aid program. A handle goes up and down. The adults help the child by naming kinds of things, each name unfolding the structure, the patterns of the practice within which the name has its place. Names of objects. This is a peacock, a man, a flea. This is food, this is clothing. Names of kinds of actions. This is sitting, this is writing, this is paying. Names of virtues. Doing this is generous. That action is brave. This response is truthful. And all four of these women dwelt in the realm of the territory I was just describing, or they were two biographers are describing here. Elizabeth Anscombe, born in 1919, dies in 2001. Philippa Foot, born in 1920, dies in 2010. Iris Murdoch, 1919, dies in 1999. And the last of the four, Mary Midgley, she lived to be, well, here she is at the very end of her life, taking she's in the river. As you can see, she died in 2018. So the very first of these authors I read was the last to go. And that's Photograph Closes, Metaphysical Animals. I don't know what to say. I think it would be a good idea, I really do, to pick each of these four women and read something of each one. I do think so. Just one thing. It would be hard to pick. I mean, I do like Beast and Man by Mary Midgley, for Mary Midgley. Philippa Foot, you know, maybe you've already encountered the trolley problem, but to read it in her own words and not a summary, the agonizing over this hypothetical. Anscombe, Iris Murdoch, you can read Under the Net, you can read The Sovereignty of Good is a very good book by Iris Murdoch. There's a lot there. But anyhow, when you look, as I said, get back to a point I made earlier, when I look through this book and think about all those years, 20s, 30s, 40s, the 20th century, and think about today, it's kind of a little bit, I guess you could say it's overwhelming. It's certainly awe-inspiring, but it's also considerable what was done. And what was accomplished here. And that's all I really have to say about that, about this book. And other than book publishing should continue in this vein, and continue in the vein where you can hold something in your hand, as we have with this. So please like and subscribe to our show, episodes like this, and have a good weekend if you can. And I will see you again soon. Thank you.